Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving. And sometimes pretty fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here's he is.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Straight Shift, the podcast that tells the truth about cars, driving, and all of the automotive nonsense we deal with. No fluff, definitely no filters, and no just trust the technology BS. Some of you may know this about me. I am a huge science fiction fan. I grew up watching Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers. I saw the original Star Wars in the theater with my dad when I was in kindergarten. We stood in line for hours, which as a 5-year-old is not the easiest thing to do, but it was so worth it. I mean, we're talking like life-changing. Pretty much if it took place in the future or a galaxy far, far away, I loved it. And I still do. But one of the things that I love most about science fiction, especially shows like Star Trek, where it's a positive view of the future, not so much George Orwell and Terminator. But sci-fi has this magical way of inspiring real invention. If you think about it, our cell phones, our tablets, our voice assistants, the smartwatches, even autonomous vehicles all showed up in science fiction long before they actually hit our market. Who remembers Knight Rider? I know you might not want to admit it, but seriously, how could you not like a smart-ass self-driving sports car? That was like my dream show, and it had zero to do with David Hasselhoff. But, here we are now in 2025 with actual robot taxis roaming some city streets. Cars that show up with no driver, sometimes no steering wheel, and often no common sense. So if you've ever thought, hey, I'd love to ride in a car driven by R2-D2 or C-3PO, this episode is for you. Here's what we're going to break down today. Who's behind the RoboTaxi and autonomous car technologies, where these things are actually operating, whether they're safe, and some of the weirdest, funniest, and most terrifying stories that might make you just want to walk forever. This is going to be part 1 of a 2-part series on autonomous driving, with part 2 getting more into how it applies to personal vehicles and what the future may hold. But right now, let's talk robotaxis. This might be a little bit of a longer episode, I'm not sure, but let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start with the basics. Who is in the robotaxi game? What are they using, and where can you hail one? The first robotaxi company, and currently the biggest player in the game, is Waymo. No surprise, Waymo is owned by Alphabet, the parent company of the almighty Google. It started actually as far back as 2004 as the Stanford self-driving car team, and that evolved into the Google self-driving car project in 2009. Alphabet spun off the company as Waymo in late 2016 and launched their robotaxi pilot programs in 2018. So they've actually been doing this for a while. And now they offer their driverless taxi rides in Phoenix, where their main hub is located, as well as San Francisco and Los Angeles. And they've just started testing in Austin, Texas, through a partnership with Uber. And they have plans to expand to Atlanta, also with Uber, and Miami as early as 2026. What do they drive? Waymo primarily is using the Jaguar I-Pace, which I found surprising. I mean, they're not exactly known for their reliability, but they are a swanky little electric SUV, so it will be a classy ride. They also have Chrysler Pacifica hybrids in case you need something a little bit bigger for that family ride to the airport. But what's really cool is they've begun testing the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Zeekr RT. What the heck is a Zeekr RT, you ask? Excellent question. Zeekr is a fairly new Chinese electric vehicle company that Waymo has partnered with to develop a purpose-built autonomous taxi. I'm going to put some pictures to these vehicles I'm describing in the YouTube version of this podcast because you really do have to see them, or you can just Google the names and check out the photos. But the Zeekr RT is really kind of cool. It's essentially a small electric minivan, but with dual sliding doors that open kind of like an elevator or subway train doors. Now, I know you're probably thinking, hey, I didn't think Chinese EVs were allowed in the US. Waymo gets around this little tariff problem by importing stripped down vehicles that don't technically count as a, quote, finished product from China. They take the stripped down vehicles and then they finish them off by installing all the self-driving technology here in the US, technically making them a vehicle that is finally assembled in America. So it is an American vehicle. Pretty sneaky, huh? I'm probably going to have to do a podcast in the future to talk about what made in America even means anymore in the automotive industry. But Waymo's pretty smart finding a way to get around the tariffs that ban Chinese EVs from the US, because they actually do have some good EV technology. Anyway, I think the little Zeekr RT looks really cute, and they should officially be joining the Waymo fleet in the next few years. The testing is going very well. The next biggest player in the robotaxi space is, or was, but more on that later, Cruise, which was GM's pet autonomous driving project. They started testing around 2016 and rolled out service in San Francisco, Austin, and Phoenix. And they were scheduled to begin testing in my hometown of Charlotte, which I was so excited about until things kind of went sideways. And again, I promise more on that a little bit later. But their fleet started out with, no surprise, the Chevy Bolt EV, which was very small for a robotaxi, but it's what they had, and it was a great way to continue to prove that technology and advertise that nice little EV. But they also unveiled the Cruise Origin, which was a futuristic 6-seater like pod on wheels. Was similar to the Zeekr RT, but no steering wheel, no pedals, no driver controls whatsoever. A true robot vehicle. Kind of looks like, if you remember the Scion XB, that second and final generation that was a little more rounded. Take two of those, whack them in half, then take both ass ends and weld them together. That's literally what it looks like. It was kind of like a double-ended toaster. Little bizarre looking, but kind of cool too. Sadly, GM scrapped that project due to the astronomical development costs and production costs, and the fact that the lawmakers and regulators had absolutely no idea how to classify this thing. They had never seen anything like it before and didn't know what to do. A smaller but not insignificant player in the robotaxi space is Motional. And that's a joint venture between Hyundai and Aptiv. Aptiv is an Irish-American company that supplies a slew of different types of technology solutions for the automotive industry, so makes sense that they would naturally evolve into this space. Motional runs robotaxis based on the Ioniq 5, no surprise, Hyundai, in Las Vegas through a partnership with Lyft. Now, the surprising part to me was that they operate in Las Vegas. Not because there isn't a great business case there due to the high demand for taxis and ride shares and any other means of transportation that the tourists don't have to drive themselves, because that would just be a very bad idea for so many reasons. But the taxi union in Las Vegas is very strong, obviously, and they pitched a fit just when Uber and Lyft came in their town and, were taking away their business. So you can really imagine how upset they are about robotaxis. And Uber and Lyft aren't happy about this either, obviously, because it's taking their business away, which is why they are now partnering with these companies, because Uber and Lyft know that the future is driverless rideshare. Motional chose Sin City for their testing because it really is the perfect environment to test and train autonomous vehicle technology. Like, seriously, all the crazy shit happens in Vegas, and we hope that it stays in Vegas. But anyone driving down the strip is bombarded with giant video billboards advertising everything from upcoming concerts and dining deals and casino jackpots. Exotic cars are merging in and out of traffic alongside mobile billboards and delivery trucks, three-wheeled motorcycles, and even bicycle taxis. I cannot imagine a more distracting driving environment than the Las Vegas Strip. But Motional is using all that insanity to train its robotaxis to ignore all of that extraneous stuff, and also to differentiate between all the different lights and colors and shapes and movements. You think about it, aside from having to ignore all of that glitz and bling, the system has to be able to distinguish between an actual person, a pedestrian that they could hit and kill, and say a mobile digital billboard that's displaying the image of a person, right? It has to know the difference. It has to know, is that flashing light a traffic signal or is it just an advertisement? It really is taking the AI to a whole new level. I mean, I know going down the Vegas Strip, sometimes I have no idea what I am looking at. But it's really pretty cool. And I'll get into how all this technology actually works in just a bit. But suffice it to say that if a robotaxi can learn to drive safely on the Vegas Strip, it can probably handle just about anything. Motional is also currently testing their autonomous taxis at highway speeds at Hyundai's Proving Grounds and Test Track in California. Currently, robotaxis are limited to city streets, although Waymo is also currently doing highway testing at their testing ground. We will likely see robotaxis on the freeways, at least those within the big cities where they're operating, within a few short years. I don't really know whether to be super excited about that or absolutely terrified. But anyway, Motional is not the only autonomous vehicle company that is testing in Vegas. Zoox, Zoox, is a company that is also testing in Las Vegas. They are also doing testing in San Francisco and Foster City, California, but they do expect Vegas to be their first commercial market beginning in 2026. Zoox was founded in 2014 and then purchased in 2020 by, wait for it, Amazon. Because, of course, Amazon is not going to stay on the sidelines in this technology race. Don't be silly. They have visions of having driverless Amazon trucks. They'll probably end up with robots delivering your packages. Humans are really going to become irrelevant. But it makes sense that Amazon would get into this race, if for no other reasons, ego. But Zoox is a neat little company, and they're currently using retrofitted Toyota Highlanders, which I found very surprising. But that's really for their testing, just to work out all the bugs in their software. They have started manufacturing purpose-built vehicles that look kind of similar to the Cruise Origin, but they're smaller, and they're more like a cross between a golf cart and a toaster. Again, picture in the YouTube version of the podcast. They're kind of weird, but I have to admit, they're also kind of cute. And like with the Cruise Origin, the Zoox vehicle has no human driver controls whatsoever. And as I said before, the government regulatory agencies really frown upon that because the current federal motor vehicle safety standards require vehicles operating on U.S. roads to have silly things like steering wheels, pedals, just in case a human being wants to control it, right? Now, the NHTSA can grant exemptions from these regulations to certain vehicles and companies under the right circumstances, and if they can prove that the vehicles are completely safe and do have the proper overrides so that a human can step in if this thing goes haywire. However, they have granted no such exemptions to Zoox. But hey, that's okay, because Zoox has self-certified that their vehicles meet the federal safety standards, and therefore no exemptions from the regulations are required. You can trust us. Our little autonomous robots are perfectly safe. Don't worry about it. Needless to say, the NTHSA has opened an investigation. But hey, the state of California has still given Zoox the go-ahead to begin testing self-driving robots on the open roads in their state, with passengers aboard. You gotta love the way these autonomous vehicle companies are playing the federal governments and the state governments off of each other. Like kids go to mom and ask to do something and are told no. So then they go and ask dad, and dad says yes. Woohoo! Because mom and dad haven't communicated. That's what it's like between the regulatory groups, between the federal government and the state governments. It's a little bit of a mess, but I think they're probably going to start getting on the same page pretty soon because this technology is not going away. Finally, we can't forget about Tesla, which keeps promising a fleet of robotaxis next year. This is a promise that they have been making every year since 2019, and it hasn't materialized yet. But the latest launch date is currently set for June 12th of this year, so that's literally a few days from the release of this podcast. It's going to be in Austin, Texas, so we will have to see if it actually happens this time or if they come up with another reason why they're not ready to do it. And honestly, I would rather they wait until they are actually ready. Robotaxis aren't just rolling out in the United States. Big surprise, robotaxis are growing rapidly across China, where one, there's a wealth of EV and AI technology, and two, a distinct lack of government regulations and legal liability. Europe, on the other hand, is a little bit slower on the uptake. They have pilot programs primarily in the UK and Germany. European companies tend to take a little bit more of a careful and conservative approach, but they are 100% committed to this race, and they plan to launch in several countries across the continent as early as 2026. So expect in the next 2 years to really start seeing this whole robo-taxi industry begin to explode, including in the US, because even though we do have all these regulations and we love our lawsuits, Trump has recently said that he will exempt these vehicles from certain safety requirements and ease the rules about them having to report any safety incidents. So robotaxis will have lower safety standards and they won't have to tell anybody when they screw up. Fantastic. And these robotaxi companies are owned by who? I'm just going to leave that alone and let y'all speculate at will. But on that note, let's get nerdy and talk about how it works. We've talked about the who and the where. So now let's talk about the how, both in terms of the autonomous technology itself and also how you can use it if you're brave enough. All you have to do is download whatever company's app and, just like with the other ride shares, order up your ride. It will just arrive, sans driver. But how does the robotaxi know where it's going and how to get there without murdering anyone along the way? Well, at the heart of every robotaxi is a massive technology stack that's doing all of the thinking for the driver that isn't there. As humans, we use all of our senses, our sight, our hearing, touch, smell, to interact with our environment. That sends signals to our brain, our computers, which process the information based on our experience, as well as instincts, and then make decisions as to what action to take. Self-driving cars work essentially the same way, and it's based on the same technology that powers the driver safety technology that we talked about in the last episode with Kendra Summer. And I'll make sure we've got a link to that as well in case you missed it. But since self-driving cars don't have eyes and ears and hands and noses per se, they use different types of sensors. The first is LIDAR, and that stands for light detection and ranging. It's basically a whole bunch of lasers spinning around the car that create a real-time 3D map of the environment around them. This is the eyes of the car. It's similar to how bats use echolocation to see, even though they're blind, but using light instead of sound. And it's how the car knows there's a cyclist next to it or a traffic cone in the road. And just like your brain, it's learned how to recognize what a cyclist is, what a cyclist looks like, by comparing that map to pictures that it has been shown of other cyclists. Same way we learn to recognize things as children and as we grow up. That is the car's artificial intelligence. The next piece of technology they use is radar, and we've heard about that for decades. It's what detects the speed and distance of objects. That allows the autonomous vehicle to track moving things around it like cars and pedestrians. This is what your adaptive cruise control, if you have that in your car, that's how that works. It's also what allows the cops to catch you when you're speeding. So we know the technology works perfectly fine. My driving record will prove that. But they also rely on cameras, not just the little backup camera that helps you to park and pull out of parking spaces, but I'm talking a boatload of cameras placed all over the car. And that helps them to recognize things like traffic signs and stoplights, lane markings, and whether that shape ahead of them is a human or maybe it's just a trash bag flapping in the wind. I don't know. But the car uses the cameras to take those pictures and compare them to things that it knows. Finally, they use ultrasonic sensors, and these are for low speed situations like pulling up to a curb without crashing into it or scraping the bottom of your car. These are the parking sensors on your car if you have those, just a few more of them. Newer passenger vehicles have all or most of these technologies, so they have been testing this for a long time. That's why they started developing those technologies. I don't think they really started them just for helping humans drive better. The long-term vision was always autonomous vehicles, and these are the stepping stones to get there, which I'll talk about more in part 2. But where the autonomous vehicles take things to the next level is with mapping and artificial intelligence. High definition maps. I mean, like, we're talking ultra high definition maps, not just your basic Google Maps, but we're talking centimeter level detail. They have mapped out the cities where these vehicles are operating. They know every curb location, the width of every single lane, where every traffic signal is, and more. Literally every square centimeter of the area has been meticulously and accurately mapped for the autonomous vehicles to function there. That's one reason that robotaxis are limited to specific areas in specific cities. Now, what happens if a construction crew rearranges the cones, if they add a new lane? The robot may or may not know how to adjust. This is where the AI comes in. I'm just imagining this is probably why they haven't come to Charlotte yet, because we are in a constant state of expansion developments. Like, literally every time I drive down a street, there's something new or some kind of construction going on. So I don't think we're ready for robotaxis here yet. But the AI and machine learning is what is allowing these autonomous vehicles to adapt to these situations. This is the brain that processes all of those inputs from those different technologies and allows it to make decisions. When to turn, when to stop, speed up, slow down, or maybe totally freak out, or just sit there and do nothing. And all of this happens in real time, every single millisecond as the car drives. It's the exact same way it works with humans, just a whole lot faster. But as with anything, these systems are only as good as the data that they have been fed and the scenarios that they have been trained on. So when something unexpected happens, like, say, a toddler chasing a balloon into the road, or a marching band crossing the street and blocking, the cars can hesitate, they can glitch, sometimes they can misjudge entirely. This is where the AI deep learning models come in. And I'm not going to get into a tutorial on AI. If you're interested in learning more about that, there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube, and I have certainly been going down that rabbit hole the last few months. And we'll touch on it a little bit more in that next episode. But in a nutshell, the more objects the system learns to recognize and identify, and the more scenarios it is fed about those objects and what could happen with them and what you're supposed to do in response, it learns more. And the better it then knows how to react to any given situation that it encounters. In other words, the system gains experience, learns, and improves, just like humans. But again, faster. And without the distractions of things like emotions, cell phones, radios, and chatting with other people in the car. But obviously, things can go wrong. Things can interfere with the sensors and cameras, can cause the robotaxis to miss things, or they can encounter scenarios that they're just not trained for. And this is where things get interesting. There have been several widely publicized and rather hilarious robotaxi stories that prove that we're not quite ready to completely hand over the keys to robots. Probably the most well-known one is the San Francisco Honk Fest. Waymo has a number of parking lots around the San Francisco area that are used as rest areas, where the little robotaxis can go and take naps, recharge, and get any maintenance they need in between rides. They especially go to these rest areas at night when the demand for rides drops. It's kind of like a herd of cows slowly wandering back into the paddock at the end of the day. Cute, right? Not so much for the people living and working in the buildings around those parking lots. The Waymo robotaxis have a safety feature that is designed to prevent low-speed collisions. So they honk their horns when they sense another car backing up towards it, like cars pulling out of parking spots or entering and exiting the lot. But this feature wasn't designed for situations where a bunch of little Waymos are together in a parking lot. Enter the 4 a.m. honk fest. The robotaxis have been keeping the residents of San Francisco up at night with constant honking at each other in the parking lots. They're literally like cows in the paddock mooing at each other all night long. In the wee hours of the morning, they then start getting ride requests, like if a plane lands early at San Francisco International Airport, and a lot of them are trying to leave the paddock at the same time, and hilarity ensues because they're still learning, like children, how to take their turn. The videos are hilarious. There's an engineer who lives out there named Sophia Tung, and she started live streaming these sessions. It's just hilarious. And I'm going to put a link in the description below to one of her YouTube videos showing some of these autonomous shenanigans. It's really funny. And it got Waymo's attention, and they have made several software updates and are working to address the problem, but their cows still moo at night. This is partly what led to the Cone Rebellion. Some anti-autonomous vehicle activists in San Francisco figured out that you can disable a cruise robotaxi simply by placing a traffic cone on its hood. No vandalism, no damage, just a cone sitting on the hood, not hurting anything. But the car just stops dead and it won't move. It literally freezes like a deer in the headlights. $100,000 self-driving marvel of technology foiled by a $5 cone from Home Depot. That is just hilarious. Some not so funny incidents include Waymo and Cruise cars blocking emergency vehicles. One actually rolled right into the middle of an active fire scene and just parked because it didn't know how to handle the situation, so it just stopped and froze. Like it was trying to help. It just completely freaked out and didn't know what to do, and then wouldn't leave. So while the firefighters are trying to, put out a fire, the emergency crews were also having to work with tech support for the robotaxi company to get this vehicle out of their scene. That has led to, needless to say, some conflict between law enforcement and other emergency workers and city officials and the robotaxi companies. A woman in Texas and some of her friends got stuck when their robotaxi just stopped halfway through the ride for no apparent reason on a busy merge lane. Cars flying past them, honking like crazy. It just stopped and locked the doors, trapping them in a robo-prison. After about 5 frantic minutes on the phone with Waymo tech support and threatening to go viral on TikTok, imagine that, the doors finally unlocked. Understandably, they were completely freaked out. I had a buddy of mine who took a robotaxi to the airport in Los Angeles, but it got confused, and instead of dropping him off at the proper airline at the departure terminal, it just kept circling in and out of the airport. It would just go round and round, and it never actually stopped. And quite frankly, I can't really blame it. I mean, have you ever tried to navigate around LAX? Oh my God. Fortunately, tech support was able to override and resolve the issue in time for him to catch his flight. So if you do plan to take a robotaxi to the airport or any other really important event, you might want to leave a little extra time. On a more serious note, in October of 2023, a woman in San Francisco was severely injured after being hit by a human driver in a hit and run situation. And then the robotaxi behind the hit and run driver didn't react in time, and it ran over her, and she was pinned underneath that robotaxi and dragged for about 20 feet before it finally realized something was wrong and came to a stop. And she sustained life-threatening injuries, but fortunately, she did recover. And understandably, she sued GM's Cruise and received a good settlement because if a human driver had been in that situation, they would have known what happened and would have reacted faster, you hope, as long as they were sober. And it probably would not have happened. They might have swerved, or at least they wouldn't have dragged her underneath the car for 20 feet. So it It was definitely a case of the RoboTaxi not knowing what to do, and her injuries were much more severe than they would have been otherwise because of that. And that actually caused GM to take a pause with the whole Cruise RoboTaxi thing itself. Also partly because California suspended their operating license, and just among other regulatory challenges and a lack of good management in the company. And as of last December, GM has fully cut funding for Cruise, and they are getting out of the RoboTaxi business entirely. Tesla, as you can imagine, is totally thrilled, but it's fine. They only lost $9 billion. No big deal. But they're instead going to focus on the development of their advanced driver assistance systems with the longer-term vision of personally owned autonomous vehicles. They want to be the first ones to get to that market. Given these widely publicized incidents, it's no surprise that the public's biggest concern about robotaxis is whether or not they're safe. Opponents, especially people whose livelihood is existentially threatened, and you can't really blame them, they claim that these things are totally dangerous and should not be allowed on the roads, and that's the basis of the lawsuits that they have filed to try to block the robotaxi companies from operating in their cities. Proponents, on the other hand, especially the companies who own them, claim they are actually safer than human drivers. So what does the data say? Well, there's not a huge amount of data yet since the technology is still relatively new, but there is enough to be statistically relevant and give us a glimpse. Last December, a report was released that looked at insurance company claim data. That's the largest data set that's traditionally used in traffic safety studies. And they looked at how often human drivers versus autonomous vehicles were found to be liable in car collisions over the past 6 years within the cities in which the robotaxis operated. Now, this study was specific to Waymo taxis and their data, and it was conducted by Waymo and their partners at the Swiss reinsurance company, so we have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But according to the report, the Waymo self-driving vehicles faced about 90% fewer insurance claims relating to property damage and bodily injuries than the human-driven vehicles. Sounds pretty good, huh? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. You also have to look at data in the context of overall miles driven. Waymo's autonomous vehicles have logged 25 million miles, I believe it is now, since they began operation, which is amazing. But it's less than 1% of the 3 trillion miles that human drivers log each year. So arguably, it's not really a fair comparison, and it's not as scientifically and statistically sound yet, but it is encouraging. So here's how I look at it. Autonomous vehicles are like teenagers who've just gotten their license, and they're really excited about it, but they still need a lot more experience behind the wheel, so to speak, before they know how to handle every unpredictable situation that can happen when you're driving. I mean, crazy stuff happens, right? And the more miles that they drive, the more mapping that's done, the more programming they get, the more scenarios they're fed, the more objects they learn to recognize, and the more testing that's done, and the more AI technology evolves, the cars are going to gain that experience. And unlike humans, those systems know and are programmed to actually follow the traffic laws. They're not prone to road rage. They obey the speed limits and don't drive aggressively when it's not necessary. They'll never drive drunk. They're not texting while they're driving. And distracted driving is the number one cause of motor vehicle accidents. So while the autonomous driving systems don't yet have our human ability to interpret and adapt to new and unpredictable situations, they don't have our instincts. They also don't have our flaws and our bad habits. And they always use their turn signals. Thank you. So what do you think about robotaxis? Do you think they're safe? Or, would you rather trust Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey? Would you consider riding in a robotaxi if you're in one of those cities? I would, because the geek in me would just simply not be able to resist the experience. Now, whether or not I would enjoy the trip is another story. It's probably time to schedule a trip to Vegas to find out, because I really do want to try one of these things out. But if you have experience with robotaxis, I want to know how it went. Tell me about it. I want to hear your stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, the, oh my God, let me out. So please share your stories either in the comments below or via the contact form on my website, thecarchick.com. As I said, the next episode will get out the old crystal ball and peer into the future to see where autonomous vehicles are going and how soon you might be able to buy one for yourself. Until then, drive safely, folks. I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright LeeAnn Shattuck, the Car Chick. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of LeeAnn Shattuck or the Car Chick.